All right, let me first of all start off and talk about the agenda for today. We're going to try to understand subsistence marketplaces. So we are throwing a whole bunch of challenges at you. And we've been doing this for a while now. And the 3,000 plus students at LMU have gone through this course. They always rise to the challenge, just as you're going to, okay? And so we need to understand these marketplaces. And today I'm going to impress upon you about how challenging it is to work in these marketplaces. And then secondly, you're going to work on this project. We'll talk a little bit about that. And finally, you get to work with your group on project deliverable 1. So let me start with understanding subsistence marketplaces. And I also want to point out, why subsistence marketplaces? Why are you focusing on that for your project? For a number of reasons. One of them is you're familiar with middle or higher income markets in developed countries, in developed economies like the US, right? But there are also middle or higher income in emerging markets, right? And finally, there are these markets we call subsistence marketplaces, which could be essentially in developed economies, in developing economies, and so on. And what we mean by the word subsistence is barely making ends meet, the broad range of low income. So why this focus? Because low income, very often people living at low income are in the shadow of these emerging markets, but they're a huge majority as well. Also, this thing doesn't move. So also they are the future middle class. So not only are they a majority, they're a future middle class. And I want you to know that this is an absolute reality. People coming out of poverty are doing so in unprecedented numbers in the last 3 decades. The best example is urban China. But we've seen it in Brazil, we've seen it in India, and so on. Those numbers are changing. People are coming out of poverty. Some of them are becoming the middle class, and so on. They could be your employees, they could be your suppliers, they could be your workers. They are your customers as well, right? And finally, these are accentuated elements of emerging markets. What do I mean by that? Everything is more complex here. More lack of resources, natural calamities, vulnerable people, and so on. And they are the people for whom you're going to develop a product and a business. I want to mention one particular place, which is Microsoft Research in Bangalore. I have had the privilege of taking about 500 students across the world. And almost 20 years ago, there was one group who worked with Microsoft Research in Bangalore. And it is the most interesting, vibrant environment I have seen, because it consisted of young people like you who were free to go out and learn about low-income marketplaces, bottom of the pyramid, subsistence marketplaces. And from that came a lot of different startups, very interesting startups, social enterprises, businesses, and so on. And the idea of doing that was simply that if you want to understand, culture, then you really need to understand people, at the bottom of society, all right? So that's where I think, I hope that you get those opportunities as well. So culture often resides among people with low income. So let me tell you, first of all, how I would describe subsistence poverty to you. And the first thing I want to say in doing that is I'm the least qualified to have studied this now since 1997. And why do I say that? Because I have never been poor, and I come from the highest social hierarchy in India. Okay? So the first house I remember, I was born in 1962, but the house I remember was a 2-bedroom house on the 4th floor of a high-rise at that time, a 6-story building in Bombay, Mumbai. It wasn't a small house. It was very comfortable, right? So I don't know what it means to live in poverty. My father was lower middle income, but I have never seen that. And I can always tell you I was a graduate student at Minnesota, but that doesn't count, folks, all right? So that's one thing I want to say. And I also want to say, anytime I'm in front of an audience talking about this, I never assume that everybody in the audience grew up middle class or higher. There are people who have grown up in poverty. There are people whose parents have grown up in poverty, and so on. The second reason why I'm the least qualified is I come from the highest social hierarchy in India. That's not Hollywood hierarchy. That's not economic hierarchy. It's social hierarchy, which means privilege is in here. That means my great-great-grandfather told my great-grandfather, you will study. There's no tough love, it's just tough. But if you study, these good things will happen. And that's what's happened to me, right? How many people had, a lineage where they had the privilege, the best resources in a village, and had this told to them, right? And so that's privilege. And so I come from the highest social hierarchy. So that's why I feel I'm the least qualified. But I have been at this for a long time. It's going on 26, 27 years. So I'm going to try my best to explain what I have understood to you. And the way I would do that in terms of explaining poverty is by describing a typical day. I'll take today, for example. When I'm in Los Angeles, I live in Playa Vista, very comfortable. I go to a gym nearby. It's got an open track, and for somebody who's mostly lived in Illinois and Minnesota, it's like a luxury. I like a certain type of coffee made a certain way with a certain type of coffee, seeds and all of that. It's from India. I got that done. And then I drive over. It's not far away. I come here, I park. Everything works for me. The roads work. The car works. My house, I've got electricity. I've got everything. Everything works for me. And if something didn't work, I have a cushion. So let's say my cell phone is not charged, and I need to call Noriko or Andrea. It's okay. If that doesn't work, I can open up my laptop and basically call people or something like that. So everything works, and if something doesn't work, I have a fallback. I have a cushion, right? So my life is filled with certainties. Now, of course, there are uncertainties like health and so on. As you get older, a lot of things happen. But my life on a day-to-day basis is filled with certainties. And if something goes wrong, I have a cushion. I have a margin of error. I have a fallback. When I fall, there's a cushion. If I take away my certainties and I take away my margin of error, you have poverty. I don't know if I'm going to have money for my next meal. I don't know if I'm going to buy the staple. I don't know the quality of the water. I don't know if I'll have fuel to cook the meal and so on, right? So my life is filled with uncertainty. And if something goes wrong and I don't have the money or the staple, I starve. I don't have that margin of error. That's the best way that somebody who is least qualified can try to describe this to you. And this is the challenge we are throwing at you, right? To understand people who live in such very different ways. So let me try to explain what exactly this means by going into it a little bit more. But before that, I want to ask you a question. I have 3 words here: Travelocity, Expedia, Hotwire. What word comes to mind when you hear that? What word comes to mind when you hear that? Just speak up. What word comes to mind? There's no right or wrong answer, I assure you, just for discussion. What word comes to mind? Yes, please.
It's there, but traveling.
Travel, right? First thing that comes to mind, travel, absolutely. Yes. Hotel, which is lodging as well, a part of travel, right? Anyone else? And there's no right or wrong answer, folks. The key thing here that you saw is that people were easily able to abstract from these words, right? And that's like breathing for you. Your ability to look at 3 things, 2 things, and say, oh yeah, here's the 3rd thing, a richer thing, right? Go deeper into it. That's like breathing for you. You're among the best students in the country. You have a good education. You're going to continue to have a good education, right? But that's not the way it is for people who are living in poverty, right? And let me show you what I mean by that. So the way we did this work was that we would go to people in adult education centers, right? In Illinois, a lot of this was in Illinois, and we would take them shopping, let us say, and so on, right? And so one of the things we did, and this I'm going back to Christmas shopping in 1997. So I took a group of people shopping. I gave them an imaginary, task. $50, you need to buy these 6 things. And I was really stunned. I came back home that day, and I still remember I thought, the things I take for granted, right? We all think that, right? But I'm going to nuance that a little bit. So when people are shopping, and these were people who were from adult education centers at the lowest level of education, 0 to 4 in reading and math equivalent, right? So finding a product, I have to find 150 candles. Well, I can't read signs. So you may think, well, so what? You can always ask people. But how many times do you ask people? It's humiliating, right? So they run around, they find something, There's no time to figure out the quality and the brand and the price and all of that. You just pick it up. Similarly, I cannot compute that easily. If one costs $1.50, how much does two cost? Sometimes it needed a calculator. I just do that. I mean, that's not a big deal. Let's say I have to buy these 6 things for $50. I bought 3 things. Well, I know how much I have left. I don't need to keep calculating. A lot of people need it to because they cannot gauge the magnitude that easily. Percentage off. I can't compute it. 70% off, I don't know what it is. I don't want to look at it. Half off, maybe I can figure it out.